So, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here today. So, I announced earlier this week that every year after our annual She Leads Summit, we look for a nonprofit in our local communities to be able to donate to and give back. And I'm really excited to nominate and actually sponsor this year a nonprofit called A New Dawn. They draw a bunch of awareness around mental health and domestic violence, and I'm incredibly honored today that the founder of A New Dawn is here with me, Justin Bradshaw. He is going to be sharing a lot of his daughter Macey's legacy and also sharing some of the tools and resources that A New Dawn has to offer. So, Justin, thank you so much for being here today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having us, and thank you for your donation. That sure means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things today, but I'd like to just first start by just sharing a little bit about Macey. Tell us a little bit about her.
Oh, Macey was a really powerful child. She grew up in an environment where she grew to love the outdoors. We spent a lot of time camping and fishing and doing different things. She loved riding horseback. That was something she was very passionate about. She loved Alaska. Every time we got a chance to go to Alaska, to go up there and go fishing, she was in her happy place. You could just feel that she gravitated toward the earth. She was kind of an earthly child. And, as she grew up, she was a person that experienced the highs and lows of life. And when she was doing good, she was really happy and bubbly and really enjoyable to be around. And when she was down and struggling with the different things she struggled with in life, you could tell she was experiencing a pretty strong low. So the cycles of her life, especially looking at it now, she had a lot of life to live, in the 20 years that she was here on earth with us. So she really got to experience all those things. And I believe she loved deep and loved strong, and I believe she struggled when she struggled.
Yeah, sounds like an amazing young girl. What do you hope people remember most about her?
That's a really... mostly probably just the power that she contained when she was in a positive place. And maybe not even so much what they remember about her, but what they can feel now about who she is. She's not gone. She's just in a different place. And I still feel her power. And I think a lot of people do, especially in a little town where we're from. Mm-hmm. And so, just understanding that, there's a big picture here to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to get into, I know that, her story is not easy, but I do want to be able to share her story and spread awareness. And you just mentioned, the small town that we're from, Bridger Valley, Wyoming. I mean, I think the population of all three towns is still under 2,000, right?
It's a little bit over that now. I think that each town has roughly, Mount View's got 1,200, Lima's got about 1,800. And then a lot of ranchers. I'd say between 4,000 and 5,000, probably.
Yeah. So small rural community, and this is why this nonprofit is so special to me. This tragic accident happened right in my hometown that Justin and I grew up in, just actually in the neighborhood from each other. So I really felt drawn to pay some special attention to this nonprofit. So if you don't mind, share a little bit about her story and what happened this past December.
Yeah. So. This past winter was pretty mild for Wyoming. It was a nice day. I remember, the day in general, it wasn't real cloudy, it wasn't snowy, just a pretty day. And I was in town, but I was supposed to be working out of town. And so I was actually leaving town, and, Lima's not very big. I'd gone around, I wasn't even to the intersection at Uri yet, and I got a phone call from Macey at exactly 11 o'clock. I remember the details of the phone calls and that day pretty thoroughly. And the phone call only lasted about 15 seconds, and she said, "Dad, he's outside. I'm scared, and I need you to come chase him away." And I said, "Okay, I'll be right there. I'm not very far." And I hung up the phone, and, I turned around and raced back to her house. And, for content, the person that she was calling me about was her ex-boyfriend. They had broken up sometime late October, early November, and he had continually wanted to continue the relationship, kind of turned into a harassment. He was also watching her, different types of things that were pretty unhealthy. And when he showed up that day, she was particularly scared, and I could hear it in her voice. And as I was headed back to town, I was speeding. I was thinking, man, this is, important. And I looked down, I was going almost 90 miles an hour in a 55, and I actually slowed down a little bit. And then instantly I was like, no, don't slow down. It was like there was that loud voice inside my head. And so I sped up. And as I got into town, she lives right by the car wash. And it's only the first 100 yards when you pull into town. I pulled up right next to her house and I left the door open in my truck, and my truck was still running. And I was looking and listening for anything that might give me clues to what had happened or what was going on. And I remember feeling a really peaceful feeling, a really still feeling. And I believe there's a really relevant reason why, and we can talk about that later. But I reached down to open the door and I heard both the gunshots. And I thought to myself, was that really a gunshot? And this all happened within just seconds. And as I pushed the door open, I opened the door to the sound of his body falling on the floor. And I seen him first, and he was consciously already gone. He didn't have any functions that there was anything still working with him or in his body. And I rushed over to be at Macey's side, and I can remember the very first thing I saw was a look of agony on her face. And I knew she was in trouble, but I didn't know what or where, how bad it was. And I grabbed my phone, I called 911, and as I was looking across her body and trying to understand what had happened, I ran my left hand down the back of her head, and as it got to the base of her head, it was covered in blood. And I knew she was in trouble. And I knew it was something pretty serious at that point. And so my urgency was pretty strong with the 911 dispatcher. She kept trying to get me to calm down. She kept trying to get me to relax, and it was a pretty heightened atmosphere, obviously, to be in. And I got Macey off the bed. She kept telling me, and she was able to talk to me, which talk about an amazing blessing. She knew that I was there to help her.
She was communicating.
She was still talking to me, yeah. Where he was completely, he had no functionings that I could see anymore at that point. And she said, "Dad, I'm going to be sick. I need you to help me get on the ground." And I had to help her get off the bed. She didn't have a lot of physical strength of her own to get on the ground, but she didn't want to throw up on her bed, which I think is so ironic. In the moment, that's the things that she was worried about. Mm-hmm. And I got her down and helped her get on the floor, and she kind of curled up in the fetal position. But she was sitting, so she had her hands tucked under her chest and her knees pulled up under her chest. And I just sat there and rubbed on her back and was waiting for help. The first lady that got there, you probably know who she is from being from there, was an EMT responder. She drives an ambulance. And she came in her own car. She had a little medical bag. And I waved her in and said, "Help my daughter, first." And something that I learned later, she was at her house, and she said, they tell us to help worst first. And unfortunately, I don't think either one of them ever had the capabilities of surviving what happened that day. But we did get medical care there really fast. From the time she called me to the time I called 911 was like 3.5 minutes. And the first responders got there within the first 10. And by the time 15 minutes had rolled around, I was already making phone calls to people that needed to know.
Wow. Yeah, that is quick, especially in a rural community.
It was. And they sent everybody. When I say everybody, there was every first responder, every cop that was on duty.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Even the people that had jobs that got paged, they showed up to help. And it was quite a difficult scene for, how real, like the tight-knit communities are, to watch a cop, go into that and then have to deal with his own emotions behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So paramedics, everybody arrived, and then they loaded her up, and then you went to Evanston.
So they called Life Flight right when it all happened. They did really well at responding to their protocols and what they should have done. We actually stopped at an exit halfway to Evanston for Life Flight to pick up Macey. And the helicopter couldn't find Macey where they were at. And we were so close to Evanston, they said, "Well, just go ahead and take him into Evanston." And both the helicopters that beat us to Evanston, they brought one for him and one for her both. And as they unloaded them from the ambulances to take him inside, you could see my family started showing up, and his family was showing up. And they were working on him, trying to get him as stable as they could to to get them transported to the U of U. That's where they were going to take them. And something happened at the hospital that, still strikes me as very powerful. And they stopped working on Macey long enough to ask us to come in and be with her. And they, everybody, I can remember this room of people standing around looking at us. And it's almost like you could feel their hearts breaking watching us go through this. The empathy,
Sure.
the power of emotion, the exchange that we felt that day was amazing. And I walked up to Macey and was rubbing her on her arms and, just talking to her. And I just remember feeling the sense of urgency. Why are we not hurrying? Why are we not trying to get her to the place where people can help her if she has a chance to make it? And I really believe that most of the doctors that were examining her could already tell she was not going to be able to make it. So they just wanted to give us a little grace, give us a little time with her.
Yeah. And because I watched a prior interview with you before, and you were talking about that, in amongst all of this tragedy and, all of the emotions and everything that's happening in real time, how there were little glimmers of, what angels or, whatever you want to call it that was happening along the way. I remember you were talking about when you finally got to Utah, one of, your longtime friends was standing right there to greet you and help you and show you the way.
Yeah, that was a pretty powerful moment. My mother-in-law had actually been there too, and between the two of them, they had actually got things organized. But when you think about going through a tragedy of that nature, and then you go to a place as big as the hospital as University of Utah has,
Yes.
and I was just lost trying to find direction on how to get information about what was happening. And I'll never forget looking down the hall and seeing him stand there. That was, very moving for me. It was like, out of all the people I could have picked, it would have been him. And he actually told me a really cool story. Part of that story is his mom was going down for just a routine procedure and a test. And I was talking to him later about it, and he's like, you wouldn't believe how many times we rescheduled that.
Wow.
And it's like there were so many things that were being aligned and, for this day happening from years and years before, even having somebody that's been in our house to help us through this. Mm-hmm. We adopted a little girl 3 years ago, and she was so powerful to help us through the days right after Macey.
Yeah.
I was in Macey.
How do you think, and by the way, thank you for sharing that story. I'm still to this day not sure how you're able to get through that, but I'm sure that, in some sort of way, this is healing for you, just being able to use your voice and share Macey's story and honor her legacy. How do you think that your understanding of domestic violence has changed since this happened to Macey?
So this is, it's kind of like we were talking earlier, it's kind of like when you buy a car and then you start seeing the same car around town, you just are never, your awareness to the things that happen to people it's just not there until you actually are touched by it. And now that we've been touched by something like this, it actually brings awareness to the situation to where we see this stuff all the time. And it's almost unfortunate how often people are influenced or affected by, the things that happen. And domestic violence to me is a label, is like a place where they create statistics, and it's something that they give a definition to that happened. But if I'm being completely honest about why I think they both lost their lives that day, it's because of a mental health problem. It's something that domestic violence is the result, but the problem actually goes way deeper than just, the product of domestic violence.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I'm sure, that makes sense why you combined both of the two. I'd like to stop and talk about a little bit, focus on, our rural Wyoming, small town America, and, just how the community has came together. Everybody knows, and everyone, my niece cheered on the same team as Macey. Yeah. They were cheerleaders together. So there's so many connections throughout the community. But how do you think that this has changed the community? And then what kind of support have you seen throughout the community after Macey's passed?
It's something that's amazing is that it's still affecting the community to this day. It's not like they've dismissed the magnitude of what happened that day. And I was walking in the post office, and there was a couple older guys that were visiting, and I could hear them. I just happened to hear part of their conversation. They were talking about my mom and about, how thankful she was for what the community had done for Macey and for for our family in general. And I stopped and talked to him. I was like, I'm actually her dad, Macey's dad. And, I go into the grocery store, I get the same opportunities to communicate with people about, it affected all of them. And some people really struggled and still continue to struggle with, the magnitude of the weight and the things that came with it. They did it. They did a Facebook auction for her, raised just a ton of money, and I instantly knew that was the start of something bigger than just what it was meant for. Mm-hmm. So this foundation has been started from the people in Bridger Valley. It started with their efforts. It started with, the small community coming together to join their power and their love together to create something, to help us create something bigger than just, a tragedy. And so every person that's contributed or fed us meals or donated something, just like you guys have done for us, it's the fuel of a bigger engine. It's the driving factor of what we're doing.
Yeah, and that really creates, impact and awareness. And also, I like focusing on the fact too that, in small town, rural, Wyoming, we don't think anything is going to happen like this. Have you heard that a lot where people are
I
like,
used to say it all
yeah,
the time.
we never thought anything like this would happen.
Yeah, I've done some real estate and sold some real estate, and I've always tell people, and I was saying this earlier, that most of the people don't lock their homes. Most of the people have this unconditional trust and respect with each other inside of those places. And and I used to tell people, you ever want to borrow my truck, go, the keys are in it. You don't even need to come and ask me, just take it. And that's the community we live in. That's that type of value. And it's been passed down through generations from our parents and our grandparents. And yeah, the magnitude of what had happened. I was visiting with a police officer, and I said, when's the last time we've actually had a homicide in Bridger Valley?
Yeah.
He couldn't even tell me because it had been that long ago. So to have something of this type of event happen it just rocked the whole community.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't even in town at the time, but I felt it,
Sure.
hundreds of miles away. And immediately, I knew somebody would be putting something up for support because that's just how the Valley is starting, online auctions and things like that. And immediately that came up. So let's kind of talk about, from grief comes purpose. And you've created this nonprofit called A New Dawn. Tell us a little bit about the name and the meaning behind A New Dawn.
So, after the fundraiser started, I was sitting in a chair and, early in the morning one morning thinking about these things and, kind of sending it out there and it came to me the inspiration came to me from Macey or whoever was inspiring me that her middle name was Dawn. And Macey has a spiritual tattoo on the back of her left shoulder that she had her sister do. And the dawn, the concept of the dawn is a new sunrise. And every day you have a chance to be able to start your reality off on a clean slate. You consciously, when you wake up that day, you get to be able to enable yourself to fight for the best version of who you are. And so the foundation's name carries my daughter's middle name, Dawn, and the purpose behind it is to bring awareness to actually helping, inspire people to find, the best version of themselves and to navigate their ways through their challenges.
Yeah, that is so inspiring, and I love the name and how it just coincides. Share a little bit about what the nonprofit, some of the tools and resources, and I'd also really like to touch on how you kind of mentioned that you really believe what happened that day was mental health, and Can you share just some of the things behind what your reasoning is behind that and what we can kind of look for?
So something that's really interesting about the story of James and Macey, or their story together, is neither one of them were impervious to the problems that they created inside their relationship together. So I kind of contribute this. They went down this rabbit hole together and in the bottom of that rabbit hole, they found the anxiety, depression, addiction. They isolated themselves from their friends. They found they kind of struggled internally with each other inside this relationship. And the signs that we saw inside that relationship are helping us, bring a message of what we can learn from what we saw, the signs of, that started them both down this place. And when I tell people, I'm saying, there's not anybody that didn't fall victim in this situation. And Macey wasn't innocent of not having contributed to some of the problems in that relationship. And And, we loved Macey, and we got her back out of that. And she was really happy and healthy and was, back in a place where she was, really finding some purpose again for herself. And unfortunately, he didn't come back from that place. If anything, he continued into that place of darkness even further. And the day, that the Macey lost her life and he took his life that day too, is really contributing to the mental health that he had, and just understanding what that looks like and what we can learn, how a support system, is either available or is something that should be available. And some people might not have a little tight-knit community to rely on, but, we've developed this foundation and put in resources on the website. Obviously we'll continue to advocate wherever we can, however we can, to try to create a message of hope and inspiration and, bring awareness through the story. But the real purpose of it is to try to help people,
Yeah, and I think just that right there, combining the two, is going to be, awareness and a mission for change. Just being like, this goes a lot deeper than domestic violence. It's really mental health and the stability of each individual on their own, and then coming together. And sometimes that's toxic and can create these kind of tragedies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this is, if he understood even the collateral damage that it would have taken to his family, specifically his mom, and how bad it's affected her, he would have never took action that day. But when somebody is so dark in their reality, they are like looking down a straw, and things about relationships with siblings or things about aunts and uncles, or even his parents and what it was going to do to them, aren't emotions that he was processing. He had lost himself to the reality of his battle inside of his mental health. And he even elaborated that inside of a letter that they found on his phone. It was a really touching letter, and we learned about this letter through the police report, and it said, if you're reading this, then I've lost my battle.
Wow.
So it brought awareness to the fact that he knew and was aware that this battle is something that he was fighting. And unfortunately, he did lose the battle that day.
Wow. So what if somebody's listening to this and they're in that deep, dark, just space, what's like a tip or a resource or, something that you can just offer some of that hope? Because I would imagine that, people, we all have down days where it's like, oh gosh, but then if it's day after day after day, it's just hard to get out of that. So is there something you can share that maybe if someone's, like I said, listening, that they can just bring themselves out of that?
The biggest thing is just to never lose focus that there's always hope to be better. When people are down in a level where their energy and their vibration and their characters are struggling so bad that they lose focus on what it feels to have joy, what it feels like to have compassion, what it feels like to have love. And those emotions that actually support who we are as humans and help us function through our challenges are dismissed. And, to understand that there's resources and people and places and, things that they can reach to, even if they feel like they're lost so bad that there is none of that, it becomes a question of determination and fighting for, their purpose, who they are, and wanting to do better for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, so I watched on your prior interview and you were talking about just how important like a morning routine, like self-care morning routine is. And you were do you want to share a few tips on that? Because I thought that was really powerful on just how you start your day.
So something that's kind of been an eye-opener to me is, before losing Macey, I really didn't have purpose. I really didn't have any value. And I was actually talking to a good friend about that exact thing. I was living in a reality that was actually meant to show me the complete abstract of what it feels like to have purpose and what it feels like not to have purpose. And when you have purpose in your life, or when you want to have purpose in your life, it takes a consistent routine or developing a habit of self-care. If you think about a habit, you have right now that you might want to get rid of or shed. Maybe it's drinking something that's not good for you, or maybe it's eating too much sugar, or maybe there's habits you have. Breaking that habit can be challenging, but creating a new habit like self-care is also equally as challenging. And so I've found myself being the personal guinea pig of my world to learn what it feels like to actually put effort into having a self-care routine. And what does that look like, and how do I measure it? What do I do? What's important to do on a daily basis? And then what do you do once a week that's different than your daily routine? And then also what's done once a month that's even more relevant and, stronger than your once a week. And then same with once a year. And this self-care routine applies to everything and everybody, even inside of a marriage. I had a conversation with my wife and I realized, wow, there's not really a great routine inside of our marriage to care for our marriage. What does it look like to go on a date night? What do you do even once a month that's different, to get a couples massage? What do you do? It's all there. But, basically going back to the importance of that routine. And the reason why is because I do believe if he would have been practicing any kind of self-care routine, we would not be having this conversation today.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have taken Macey's life, and then I don't believe he would have taken his own. So the importance of really people that are down that low is do something good for yourself. Just that morning, that day, start yourself off with doing something that's positive and build on that. And then start to measure what it looks like to have a routine of self-care. And then when you get to that point and that habit's established, understand it's not negotiable. Don't let other things, don't let other people, don't let the world try to take that habit away from you, because that's really where you find the best version of who you are, where you find your purpose, where you find the joy inside yourself, the joy inside your marriage, the joy inside of, what really life has to offer. Wealth isn't measured by money, it's measured by joy. A lot of wealthy people don't have joy.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that you were saying too, like just, those small things in the day, and it can just be starting with one thing, but how that just starts, raising your frequency.
Yeah.
So you're, like generating on a higher frequency, and how much that can start, snowballing just one day at a time and just taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, and that's really the big thing, is when you understand the difference of what your vibration and your frequency feels like when you're not practicing self-care, and what the daily challenges pose to you versus when you actually practice self-care, and when you can sit in peace, when you can sit in the calm, when you can react, out of a place of love. There's always this 1 second where there's more power found, and you have a thought and then you have an action. And between the thought and the action, there's this one little tiny place where you can find power if you sit and choose to look for that power. And that's really where, this message is meant to help people find that power, that placement, and understand how they can become better. And, it comes in a place where you have to actually feel uncomfortable. Growth does not come when you're comfortable. Think about living a daily routine life and just going through the motions. If you're living in comfort, you're really not making any progress. So put yourself into a place where you're uncomfortable and look for the growth. It's really where you find it. Yeah,
such a powerful message. So let's talk about New Dawn. What do you have coming up in the future? What kind of things do you have scheduled? And what do you hope that this turns into in the next few years?
So this is my mission for life now. This is part of who I am. And, it's as equally as important as raising a family and being a husband. And I don't want to, sacrifice one for the other. And so it's a fine, line to walk to do both.
Right.
But it does come with a lot of adventure, a lot of purpose. I meet and network into some amazing people. I go to places. I've got some keynote speaking events coming up in August, and at that event, Gabby Petito's parents will be there. And they've been wonderful help to help us shape the foundation and kind of understand this is where you go, this is what you do, this is what we've learned. So networking into other foundations has been huge, and we've started doing that right away. And then all the things we get to do with Macey's story. There's a thing the state of Wyoming does called the Silent Witness Initiative, and they have a program in place where once a year they induct people into this program, and they retire people from it, and they have to fall within a really specific criteria of, how they lost their lives and where it happened and things. And the Silent Witness Initiative, the whole purpose behind it is to let these women or men, and there's some cases, even the kids in the program, that have lost their voice to still have a voice, to still represent, themselves. And so it's something that I'm really excited to do, and that's in October. So it's, there's things we've got planned and set up even all the way through next year. And so the new world that I live in, that our family lives in, that everybody that's been affected by this is so much more powerful, so much more purpose. And there's so much more joy. Sure, the heartache still comes. All the emotions you work through still come. But to sit with the emotions that actually empower you and raise your frequency and your vibration, and being able to let go of the other ones, That's really the key of being able to find, the real purpose in it.
Well, I have no doubt that you and your family are going to do amazing things. I'd like to kind of close with, when people hear Macey's story, what do you hope that they feel or remember about her story?
Something that everybody that hears the story, they feel the empathy behind it. They feel the sorrow behind it, and they feel the tragedy behind it. But I really believe that we knew, and speaking of we, me and Macey knew that our roles before we came to Earth were very specific. And my role was to be her father and to raise her till she was 20. And her role to me was to inspire me to find a sense of purpose in life and give me a gift that was better than anything that I could have imagined. And so that day, when everything happened, people don't understand the blessings and the miracles that we got to feel, the bright spots in the darkness, the connections to past loved ones. I lost my dad when I was 12 to cancer, and he was there that day with us. And I talk about feeling the calmness and the peace when I walked in. The reason why is because there were angels, and there were people, and there were spirits there that were present to help us get through that. And my dad was there with me. And so to rekindle the value of those things and to connect with really the purpose of life and the passion of life, and to be able to share that with people, that's really what Macey's story is about. It's not about her losing her life. It's about the greatness of her sacrifice and what it can do to help other people.
Well, that's powerful and touching, and I think a perfect note to end on. So I can't thank you enough for coming from the Valley today to join us and to just create some awareness and share Macey's story. And I can't wait to just watch and cheer you on and see all the amazing things that you and your family do.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for what you guys are doing too. This is a place where we need as many people advocating for a better version of everything. It doesn't start or stop with Macey's, but what you're doing with your program for women, creating power, all those places. It's really, truly a new battlefield we live in. And unfortunately, things like technology and the rest of the influences out there, they make it a little more difficult.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
It is, but thank you again. I appreciate you having us.
Thank you. Okay, so when we started the show earlier, I talked about a donation. So I'm excited, Justin, to present this $1,000 donation to A New Dawn. I hope that it just, sheds a little bit of light for the nonprofit and does a little something and makes a little impact.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Everything helps. It does. And it's very humbling too. It's very appreciated. So thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining today. We hope this sheds a little bit of inspiration and light and also creates some awareness around domestic violence and mental health.